is not good for you? Because I don't think about it. Well, that's living in denial. Living in denial? Yeah. I'm aware of that.
I love that little exchange between De Niro and Grodin, and it was pretty perfect if we were doing existential thrillers still, Dan.
Yes.
But we're not.
We were doing absurdist action movies this cycle.
Yeah.
That was
this
from
is our 80s
Midnight
episode.
Run. Yes, the 80s episode. When we came up with this category, I was like, well, we can't really leave the 80s because it's like this is where it all really started, the action comedy.
We could easily do a whole cycle of episodes just from the 80s.
Just from the 80s. So we're talking about two movies, 48 Hours and then Midnight Run. Both I would call what paradigms of the buddy action comedy genre. Does that make sense?
Just maybe. I think that's our guest flipping through his notes. Let's welcome
Who do we have
him.
as our guest?
This is Film Trace, and we have our returning guest, good friend of the pod, Drax, coming out chill from Hollywood. Thanks for being here with us, Drax.
Well, thanks for having me again, guys. Appreciate it, and good to be here.
We did 2 episodes with you already. I was looking through this, Children of Men, and then we did The Fountain.
Right.
I think this will be less contentious than those 2
yeah, probably so. I mean, those 2 are,
We'll see. I had kind of a strong reaction to one of these.
All right, fair enough. Well,
interesting. I'm
that's
already
that's a teaser, I guess. All right, fair enough.
So what's up first, Chris?
We have to talk about arguably the first film in the genre of action buddy cop. Well, they're not both cops. It is the 1982 Walter Hill classic, I guess, is the general term thrown about, for 48 Hours, starring Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy. Nolte plays Jack Cates, a kind of grizzled cop that has to find a guy that killed his partner, played by a fellow cop, played by Jonathan Banks of Mike Ehrmantraut, Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul fame. Dies early on in the movie, unfortunately, and then he teams up with Reggie Hammond, played by Eddie Murphy, who's a convict that supposedly is pretty much the only lead to where this cop killer has gone. Dan and I were talking a little bit, Drax, before you popped on. This is the first time both of us had seen it all the way through.
Really?
What about you?
What's your history?
First of all, I want to say, like you said, Nick Nolte is, quote, kind of grizzled.
He's very grizzled.
Yeah,
okay.
He's like the archetype of the grizzled, hungover, like hard-boiled, anyways, in the I used to always rent a lot of videotapes, like when I was like a teenager, and kind of like discover a lot
Christian Bale in American Psycho.
Yeah, well, like kind of discover a lot of these movies in the 80s, in the early 90s and mid 90s as like a teenager, and 48 Hours kind of came across my radar because of Eddie Murphy. Of course, it's his star-making turn. Like, this is the movie that put him on the map. And, just being a fan of like other Eddie Murphy movies, I was just like, well, I got to see it. And, watching it all the way through, I can kind of understand if this movie is on cable nowadays, you probably switch the channel. Like, you might not really be that interested. So I can kind of relate in that respect. But
why is that though? Why do you think it's not as interesting now?
I think, I was kind of like, when I was watching it recently for the show, first of all, it doesn't hold up very well. It is dated at this point, and the story is very, very bare bones. It's not really, obviously the only attraction here is the chemistry between Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy. Like, them playing off each other is, of course, the main attraction. And there are some really good scenes, and they, but it, like, I would say like 15 minutes of the movie is like good Eddie Murphy, Nick Nolte stuff, and then the rest is just like forgettable, like whatever.
Well, yeah, it's got that like 80s pacing, which I think if you're younger, you wouldn't be used to at all. Because like if you look at the average movie back in the 1980s, it was just, even though they still ran the same length, 90 to 120 minutes around that, the pacing is just so. We were just talking about Bullet Train, which is a movie that is very much in the Tarantino postmodern, every 2 seconds is a cut. Or think about Michael Bay, a cut every second sometimes.
Or even Hot Fuzz, Edgar Wright.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. They're like
This is not
kinetic
that
films.
clip. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have that sort of pace to it. And yeah, I would say that it seems dated. I will say this, just from a technical perspective, whoever did the restoration or digital transfer of this is amazing. The version of it on Paramount Plus that I watched looked so crisp and wonderful.
That's where
It's
I
maybe
watched
one
it
of the
too.
best looking films from the 80s that I've seen in a long time. It looked pristine.
And that's, I think that's also a testament to Walter Hill, right? Like The Warriors still looks really good if you get a good transfer of it. He didn't fuck around when it came to, you know, and he's always good at like making it feel really like this is like San Francisco's not a clean town, and he really made it feel like grungy and grimy in the best way possible.
Well, there's a scene actually that I really noticed for the first time as an adult. It's an exposition scene. It takes place in the police precinct, and it's a one-shotter. Of just
it's like Altman-esque.
I was just like, whoa! As a teenager, I didn't register that at all, and then to see it, like you guys said, kind of in a pristine environment, kind of restored and all that, I was just like and you'll probably get into this about the director's bio, like Walter Hill knew what he was doing, at least with the cinematography and kind of setting the stage and getting this information out in a way that's pretty creative, at least for the time.
Let's talk about them. What else did he do before? So we mentioned The Warriors, which came
I
out
was
in
gonna.
79.
I would mention that because that's one of my favorite movies, and there are a lot of Warriors veterans in this movie. The villain James Remar was in The Warriors, and one of my favorite character actors, David Patrick Kelly, who plays a small character in the movie called Luther. He's infamous in The Warriors.
The bottles, right?
Yeah, and so so you kind of see some of the pedigree there, and like I said, it's just like these are the movies I watched as like a teenager to kind of catch up on the biography of these people, and it's nice to kind of see them, kind of graduate to other bigger films that Walter Hill did. And of course, Walter Hill as a producer has hands in a lot of favorite movies as well.
Like Alien, right? Is that true that he produced Alien or helped produce it?
He gets, I think, a credit on all of them just because of legacy, but definitely the first film.
Did you guys ever see The Driver, 1978?
No, it's always been on my list.
It's a good one. It's like doesn't hold up super well, but definitely has a great style to it. And then the one that sticks out that I have not seen that seems to have a sort of aura around it is Southern Comfort.
Mm-hmm.
With Powers Booth, right?
Right.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I saw it, and one of my big things way back in the day was watching like Monster Vision on TNT, and
Bob Briggs,
and kind of also Monster Vision adjacent. They would show all these kind of weird, kind of like out of the kind of culty films and stuff like that. And Southern Comfort was one that I happened to catch, and I mean, it's interesting for a filmmaker that kind of was so influential in the era. I don't feel like people talk about him a lot these days.
He hasn't really. Yeah, he had a big bomb in 2000 with Supernova.
I don't remember that at all.
I remember with Robin Tunney and Angela Bassett in that one, or I'm thinking probably of Strange.
Angela Bassett and James Spader and Robert Forster.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a complete train wreck.
The poster looks terrible, even.
But and then before that, it was another flop, and not as much so. Last Man Standing with Bruce Willis.
I remember that one.
And it's supposedly a remake of Kurosawa's Yojimbo.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he really hasn't had a big movie, honestly, since Another 48 Hours, the sequel to this one.
Which came out, 8 years later, I believe.
1990, which is was not well received, right?
No. I kind of actually probably remember the ending of another 48 Hours more than this one, just because I saw it probably more recently. But yeah.
So what do we think 48 Hours really established? Right? Like I think on the top of the show we sort of mentioned is it really the start of buddy? It's not really a buddy cop movie technically because Eddie Murphy's not a cop; he's a convict here.
It's
right?
the way that I kept thinking about it, because I was stuck on that, and we'll talk about it with Midnight Run as well. Like that's not, neither of them are cops technically in that movie, but it's like the odd couple crime movie, right?
Well, Nick Nolte is a cop. Nick Nolte is a cop, but he's the only one of the four that we're talking about. Yeah,
correct. And I mean, he shouldn't be a cop. Like
right. I wrote that in my notes too. It's just like,
what? Go ahead.
I was just it's just to let the cat out of the bag here because I didn't want to mislead you guys. So yeah, I love the look of this movie. I think Walter Hill knows exactly what he's doing behind the camera, but because of the script, which has a number of credited writers, and the dated aspect of it, I'm sorry, I do not like this movie. I did not like it.
God, I was enthralled.
Oh my gosh!
I thought it was just incredibly. Oh man, I don't know. There's something about like the way it was edited together, the tightness of it. Oddly enough, I think Eddie Murphy's performance is good. This is really he's also not like a trained actor,
right?
So like
that's
this is
noticeable.
his first sort of,
and he doesn't show up until
SNL
Act 2.
Guy. What was that?
Right.
He doesn't show up until Act 2 either. So
correct. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's always said as like Eddie Murphy vehicle. He's sort of the standout. Yeah, without a doubt. And people always mention like the redneck bar torches.
Well,
that whole scene where
that actually still is really good. The redneck scene is still really good.
That scene sings. Yeah.
But and that's only 5 minutes of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's true. And like a lot of people mentioned that scene. I actually thought that scene was fine. But to me, it's like the whole how it all kind of the mechanics of the film works so well to me. The timing,
none of it
the
makes
pacing.
sense though.
What do you mean? What doesn't make sense? Come on, give me something. Give me something to bite on.
Like James Remar does an admirable job trying to play a cop killer without a motive, really.
Psychopath,
psychopath, like, but just like none of that hangs together. Like, why are they sticking around San Francisco? Why do they come back to the girlfriends? Why is Eddie Murphy like connected to them at all? I don't know.
You know what's astounding? They let him get away 3 times in the movie. 3 times.
Why does Nick Nolte give him his gun? I don't understand that. Why would you give up your gun? That's like the number one rule of cops.
I can't remember a movie that's kind of stringing you along like that, where it's just like, well, he got away again, guys. Like, it's not a TV show, it's a movie, so it's like it's not like we'll be back next week, folks. No,
you guys, come on.
No, I have to agree with my friend Chris here. Watching it for the first time way back when I was a teenager, I was just like, oh, this is, it's an Eddie Murphy movie. Okay, great. It's rated R. And it's, got a lot of violence and, sex and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Great. But watching it as an adult, I'm just kind of like, if this were on, like I said this early in the show, if this were on cable and I had like the nostalgia vibes going on, I'd be like, no, I don't need to watch this again. I'm done. And for a lot of the reasons we've touched on, it's like the nostalgia alone is not enough. It's dated. The humor doesn't really register. There's like, I'll let you guys kind of continue, but I kind of have to agree with Chris. Like, it's not that great of a movie in retrospect.
Okay, two counterpoints. Okay. One, it's purely genre. Right? They're not with the story. They're not trying to do anything fancy.
Classic
Can
defense.
we agree on that? What'd you say?
Classic defense, Dan.
Okay,
it's okay that it doesn't make sense because it's a genre piece.
Well, no. It's like there is a base layer narrative that we all know and get. It's cops and robbers. It's not supposed to be that complex, right? 2, Hill said himself in an interview, I think in 2012, he goes, this line is hilarious. He goes, the story was preposterous, so why not make it kind of humorous? So there's absolutely a self-awareness to when they were making this, and they also cast Eddie Murphy. Who else was up for that part? Richard Pryor, who's also up for that part.
Yeah, Gregory Hines. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
So they got Eddie Murphy because I think that the studio let him do it, and I think the other guys are probably too expensive.
Well,
but
also,
there's, go ahead.
Well, so also what's kind of a little unsaid here is Eddie Murphy was on SNL at the time.
Yes.
And
he's 20. He's 20.
He's such a, he had so much, just reading some kind of, some of the biographies and like oral histories and written histories of kind of the era, both on SNL and just kind of at the time. It's just kind of like, after this movie, and we've said this before, he just blew up incredibly, and it all got thrown at him all at once. And I really do you can kind of see it on screen that he might not be as confident as you would like a Richard Pryor or a Gregory Hines would have been.
Yeah.
And so it makes it a different movie, and it is kind of fascinating to watch in retrospectively, because you just kind of feel him kind of finding the voice that we would be so familiar with and I'm sure we'll get into the legacy of this, like Beverly Hills Cop and all these other things that he would go on to do. So in that way, watching this movie was really interesting to see, like, this is kind of where it did all start with and I kind of actually take issue with I do think this is the buddy cop formula, even though you couldn't quite classify it as so. If you're using a rubric that is just like, well, they both have to be like good cop and bad cop or whatever, that doesn't matter, because like, as we'll also discuss with like Midnight Run, like it hits the same beats that we are going to see for the next 40 years. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of those beats in a minute here.
There's one quote I got to throw out there, just because you mentioned Murphy kind of being new, and this is one of his first movies. Hill said also in the same interview, he said this to Nick Nolte about Eddie Murphy. Hill says, "Look, he's a great talent, but he's not a trained actor. So Nick, buddy, this is the way it's going to be. It's going to be like working with a little kid or a dog. The one take that's good, we're going to have to print it. So that means you have to be good at every take." And then Nick Nolte, like gruff, like sort of like, rah, rah, like his usual thing to Hill. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that did you see that? I saw a little bit of that. Maybe his screen presence, Eddie Murphy's screen presence, isn't sort of incandescent, so to speak. But he's so funny and so on the mark, and his timing's so fantastic that like he really, I think in a lot of ways, he makes this film interesting.
Yes.
Where if it was just Nick Nolte doing this with another actor in that role, it doesn't work. Doesn't work. I don't think it's too boring, too genre-y.
And I think that, like, I mean, that's part of the problematic nature of this film's place in history, I think, is because, you don't have really any path for this genre to go without Eddie Murphy, because even with I think it needs to be said at some point in this episode, so it might as well be now. Like, if we're talking about the 80s, we're talking about action comedy, we're talking about absurdism in the kind of the crime comedy archetypes. Why aren't we talking about Lethal Weapon or Beverly Hills Cop? And I think ultimately you end up with not only this one being the first, but the one that is like still like messy and trying to figure out that combination, right? And Bill Simmons talks about this on the Ringer's Rewatchables podcast about this movie, where it's like it's not just like those are the three big black actors of the time period, though that's part of it, Murphy, Hines, and Pryor. But like Pryor, it would become the Richard Pryor show, right? And so like by having something more inexperienced like Murphy, you're able to like somehow be able to give Nick Nolte equal weight to that duo. With Gregory Hines, like he's not profane enough, right? He's not like rough enough. to kind of fill that role. And Ebert, I think, had a really good observation of this movie. And it is, once again, that scene, which I do think is a great scene, even though I don't like this movie, when he walks into the redneck bar. He calls that scene the mirror image of the scene in French Connection when Gene Hackman intimidates the black regulars at the Harlem bar, where it's like kind of this, and Eddie Murphy talked about this a lot, like why he took this role, not just because he wanted to be a movie star, but also because like he liked that the script gave him this chance to not just be the quote sidekick, where it was like legitimately they had equal footing. And by being that kind of first African-American role in a movie that could, you know, bring in this cross section of audiences, where he could like go into that, like it's Eddie Murphy versus like 45 assumedly violent hicks, and he stands his own. And I agree with you guys to some point that like it definitely feels kind of like an amateurish performance, especially if you look at it in context of Eddie Murphy's entire career. But like that's where that, like, I wanted that scene more throughout the movie, because the rest of the film just feels so like kind of ramshackle put together, like it has been put through the, you know, script doctor factory, so that the only things that really land at the end of it are the moments with Eddie. Like am I off base here? Like that's the only, like if it wasn't Eddie Murphy, this movie would be way worse than it already does play in 2022.
Well, instantly forgettable, of course, it would be if Eddie Murphy wasn't in it. Like if I mean it, like it wouldn't have even registered. Like I really do kind of again latch on to the fact that all the other scenes apart from kind of the hillbilly redneck bar scene, they kind of feel very kind of just rote, exposition heavy. Eddie Murphy is kind of what I kind of got from a lot of the characters in the movies. They were always on a hunt to get laid. Basically, that's kind of like apart from like the flashes of like intense violence that you see in the movie. There are a lot of big shootouts and like big guns going off everywhere. It's always just kind of like, well, the villains are always trying to get laid. Eddie Murphy's trying to always get laid, and Nick Nolte is having relationship problems of his own, and so it's like all you know. I kind of wrote in my notes, it's kind of a horny movie. It's like,
it's super horny.
And like
what the hell?
And they're talking about it, and I love some of the dated jive, like I'm gonna give her the high hard one and stuff like that. But like they're talking about basically trying to get laid all the time in the movie, in between these punctuated like intense violent scenes, which are actually, by the way, very well done. I was like kind of taken aback by like how intense some, the shootouts, like there's a particular sequence later in the movie where they're on a bus and they're shooting from the bus to the convertible, and it's actually it's something I kind of forgot about watching it again, but it's like it's a movie about a cop killer. This guy is basically on a mission to kill as many cops as he can before he can kind of leave the scene. And then there's a little bit of comedy, of course, mixed in, and then there's a lot of talk about, like I said, about getting laid and stuff. This is kind of where I can really sympathize with Chris's viewpoint. Like, the movie is just kind of all over the place, and there's just like, I don't know. Sorry.
What do we make with a constant obsession with sex here? Especially like Eddie Murphy's character is like, just give me 10 minutes. Like, he's constantly trying to bed, I guess the polite term, in the police station.
You're not going to say "get trim" on the podcast?
See that? Yes, I get another like, slang term I wrote down.
No one said that since like 1985. Like,
exactly.
They say it so many times.
But what is that all about? I think the thing that blows my mind about that is
I like doing laps. That was one of the ones. Like, I'm gonna doing laps. I'm like, oh, okay.
Oh, I missed that one.
No one says that.
Although I remember people saying that in college. Anyways,
went to college in North Carolina.
Yeah, that's true. So, that also stood out to me, and I was like, how do I process this? Because like my immediate gut reaction is, oh, this film's super misogynistic.
Yep.
And
homophobic too.
Homophobic.
Yeah.
I want to process it that way because it's 2022, but at the same time, there's something else going on as well. Yeah, it's offensive and it's weird, and is that how men were in the early 80s when we were born? Is that how people thought about sex? Honestly, I don't know. But like it's so overt and so even different to something in the 90s. Like it's bizarre.
I think that maybe because Nick Nolte's character is a product of an even earlier generation in the film. He's not an 80s man per se. He's like a late 60s man or something like that. So in that, maybe through that lens, some of his, like, again, mannerisms and lingo, like, kind of makes sense. Like, he's definitely a little bit more of a fish out of water in the early 80s if we were to watch it at the time. And Eddie Murphy's job, to some degree, is to kind of bring him up to speed a little bit. Like, Eddie Murphy can give him a lot of the business and saying, like, dude, you're old. Like, but that's why I think the film, like, tends to not really work for me on reviewings. It's just like, it's so dated and so like no one ever talked like this is kind of how I sometimes feel when I'm watching this. It's just like it rings kind of hollow, and kind of Chris touched upon this in the believability scale. It's just like, this is just kind of a vehicle for these two actors to play off each other, and everything else that kind of gets applied to it, including the plot, the story, everything, like, it's just in service of just watching these two actors kind of make a play of this. And I think in that respect, it actually still works in that I did like a lot of the Nolte and Murphy scenes, like them just like jawing with each other and arguing. And they actually have a fight scene, which we haven't touched upon yet. Which is not up to the They Live levels, which is which is kind of the gold standard. Which is the gold standard. But I did doing a deep dive of this, and it's actually recorded that the actors land the same number of punches, with each other during the scene. But Nolte comes up one short, supposedly. And I haven't counted. But so when you see the scene after the fight where they're in the car, and they're about to drive away, and Nolte sucker punches him, at the end, that supposedly brings the total up to equal number of punches.
Which he started with a sucker punch in the first place, right?
Well, I actually like Nick Nolte's I fight dirty. Like, again, like the two actors, they really do play off really well against each other. And that is, again, that's the attraction of the movie for me still.
Well,
it's just not enough.
Not enough. But in talking about like laying the foundation of a genre or subgenre and tropes and stuff like that, that's also another classic trope. Two men disagreeing, fighting with each other, then after they physically beat up each other, they somehow become closer.
Yeah.
Which is that's very common. Real life, I've seen this happen multiple times. Right. So it's kind of an interesting, another layer to it, I guess.
Well, kind of against type, Nolte kind of opens up about his relationship with his girlfriend, kind of unprompted almost. I mean, all Eddie Murphy has to say is like, "You having lady problems, Jack?" And he's like, "Yeah, let me tell you,
Takes the drink.
And Ned O'Toole is Bill number 3 in this movie, who's Nick Nolte's girlfriend, Annette O'Toole.
Yes.
She's billed number 3 in this movie. She's barely in it.
She's like there for like 2 minutes.
Like phone calls.
Yeah.
Where are you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Nagging, always nagging.
So that I keep wanting to insert this question, and this is part of it. That whole problem is part of it. Why do we like Nick Nolte's character? Like Eddie Murphy's just natural charisma. It doesn't matter that he's a convict. It doesn't matter that he's like 24/7 horny. Like he's got this kind of like genial, happy quality, and like he's the one that's actually like trying to do the work in the friendship, right? Like. That is kind of a sweet scene where he does call him, even though it doesn't make sense plot wise, from Romans, where the busboys are playing, right?
Right.
but like, but yeah, Nick, and this Kate's character. Why do we?
Oh.
What's
Yeah, this
likable
is-
about him? Anything?
He's like a the classic noir detective type, right? Like he's hard boiled, he's violent, he's
Well, if
mean,
there's a
right?
Oh, those are all good qualities.
well, there's a scene. Well, the scene at the end where he takes out the villain. He's just kind of like, well, if you're kind of, this is a very '80s thing where it's kind of, he says something to the effect like, "This is where it ends," like, or "It's over for you," or whatever. Like, kind of the Dirty Harry aspect where it's like, I'm just gonna take out the bad guy and not let him hurt any more people.
Yeah, there's an ideology here.
At its base, that was very popular. I mean, again, the Dirty Harry thing, like the Reagan era, like that was like, go get the bad guys and take them out.
Yeah, the Soviets, right? Get
Mi-
those guys. There's
might-
definitely there's a
Well-
cop hero worship thing going on.
Might
Yeah.
And that,
might might makes right. That was the whole thing at the era.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but I don't know. I think you guys are being a little bit with his character. He does seem to have some sort of moral code going on, right?
He's not a corrupt cop. He's very like he
He
establishes.
doesn't take the
this-
money.
Yeah, that's what he and in
Right.
Midnight Run, the other movie on this show, like it's the same deal. Like the character is well established in not being corruptible, monetarily at least. Like they're not going to take that payoff. Like that's not what they're all about.
But I think
Okay.
So I think there is some sort of there's something about his character, Nick Nolte's character, where he has that strong moral code. Not strong. He has a moral code. Let's put it that way. But I think a lot, and to Chris's point here, I think a lot of the goodwill that his character has is just fumes of like a patriarchal ideology of like cop worship. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
it is.
And
Right?
I mean,
He's the center. He's the white dude in power. He has control of the situation. We look to him to be the protagonist, right? Like
And
that's
we
just
haven't
kind
even,
of the rhythms that we had.
we haven't even talked about like the racist aspect, right? Like,
Right.
obviously,
Yeah,
I actually took note of all the stereotypical and insulting terms, and it was just like, this guy is really not cool at all. Like, I mean, obviously
yeah,
it's an understatement, but it's just like, he basically has to apologize. And there's a scene, of course, that he apologizes for calling Reggie the N-word, and it's just like,
Mhm.
I take Chris's point, like, what are we to make of this person? Like, are we to,
right.
like, I mean, it's kind of, that's kind of also a hangover from kind of like the Archie Bunker syndrome of like the
Yes.
70s.
Mhm.
It's just like, oh yeah, they're a bigot, but they're not like the worst person in the world. And it's just
Bigot with
like,
a heart of gold.
but
Classic.
that doesn't, which is just like, I never, I don't know how you fellas felt about, stuff like that when it gets kind of like just passed around nonchalantly like that. It's just like, no, they're a bigot. They're like bad news. Like, it's not that there are no redeeming qualities about, anyone. It's just like, you can always find kind of diamonds in the rough, but at the same time, it's just kind of like, it's not to be celebrated that this person is, like a bigot some of the times and then tries to make up where it's just like, I don't know. I mean, maybe you guys have more to say about it. It's just, I kind of take, like I said, Chris's point. Like, I did question multiple times during the movie, like, are we actually supposed to like Nick Nolte at any point here?
Right. I do.
I
I
think
will
it's a-
say,
right, yeah.
it's unfortunately treated as kind of like a throwaway capper to the scene, but the one that you mentioned where he apologizes, he says like, I just thought I was doing my job or whatever, and then Eddie Murphy responds by saying like it's not just your job. Like at some point it's not just your job, right? Like implying that there's something
Right.
deeper going on.
Okay.
And it's just like there is like that semblance where once again, like I do think that what Eddie Murphy does here saves a lot of the movie, even in like a historical context. Watching it, its 40th anniversary this year, but I do, yeah. I mean, I think ultimately it comes down to your point, Drax, that like if you're gonna have a character that it does horrible things and is just generally doesn't seem like a good person, it's not enough to let him have a moral code when it comes to I don't know, good versus evil. Like, it just feels, it's hard because it also feels like it fits the vibe of the movie. Like, it's supposed to be like a politically incorrect in the heat of the night, right?
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
Which is
but that,
actually cited, by the way, sorry to interrupt, Heat of the Night is actually cited as a precursor to the genre.
sure,
Yeah.
yeah. So, like, I mean, what do we make of that in terms of the 80s? Like, I don't know. We were talking about Lethal Weapon. I don't know how much of that kind of stands the test of time, or continuing with Shane Black, Last Boy Scout. There is that dynamic. Like, why is this dynamic often have this racial subtext to it?
That's a
I think
good
it's like a
question.
pressure release.
That's actually a pretty
Yeah.
good question, because I think as you guys are going to kind of explore the genre further with other examples and stuff like that, you know, and we're gonna. I mean, at the heart of it, I think it comes down to, like I said, kind of the good cop, bad cop, different personalities, different backgrounds, kind of thing. Like, you always have to kind of play the character. It would be, of course, uninteresting if both of the characters, were the same. If they both had the same outlook. So, but I think Chris's kind of point about what is it about this genre that tends to kind of put people from different ethnic backgrounds against each other.
Well, it's got to be like the classic American story that we tell about how anybody from any background can come together and work together, right? Isn't that what they're trying to tell us?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's that, and that's ultimately part of in the heat of the night, right? It's more in like northern, southern.
And then, I mean, it's important, the context of this movie coming out when it did. Obviously, 40 years later, we can point to certain things and be like, well, this seems dated or out. Well, of course, it's dated. It's 40 years old. But like with the historical context of the time being released in the early 80s, I don't have enough knowledge to really know what it was like back then. But this film is cited as, taking sort of steps in the right direction in terms of depicting people on screen. And, I don't know if that's true or not, or like that's valuable. But I don't know. There's something to be said to sort of having these two characters come together and not have it devolve into some sort of like there's literal fist fighting, but at the end of the day, they do work together, I guess. Is that to hold hands?
Well, I think, Chris, you guys brought it up, though. Eddie Murphy is the one who is actually doing the most work here in terms of trying to make the relationship work. He is saying, Chris, I think, brought it up. Like, he's at the bar kind of towards the end of the movie, and he's escaped. He could kind of try to get away, but he calls, Nick Nolte's character and says, like, hey, I still have a lead. We can still win this. Like, get your shit together. Come on down. We can win this. So there is a very, like, kind of positive vibe in the sense that,
it's not cynical, right?
No,
it's not like a huge cynical thing with them. But like, let's jump to Midnight Run. Where do
can I offer a connective thread between these two films?
Please,
other than the obvious. James Horner's score.
Oh, I meant to bring that up.
Oh my God.
Danny Elfman's score in Midnight Run, just bangers after bangers. I think that's what's one of the most interesting things about like the 80s action genre is not only they were like fusing narrative elements together to create something kind of a new mashup, but that was also happening in film music, that kind of transition from the synth stuff of the late 70s to some of the more like bombastic orchestral stuff. And like, it's really fun. Yes, it's dated. Yes, it sounds cheesy, but like, especially, with the way Danny Elfman's career has gone over the years, and kind of the more in many ways a lot of different composers have kind of pigeonholed themselves over the years. Like, it was really refreshing to hear something that was like trying to be a big part of the movie and not just like sit in the background.
I will say though, counterpoint perhaps a little bit. Have either of you guys seen the movie Commando with Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Oh yeah.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So basically, James Horner rips himself off all
Oh
the
yeah,
time.
that's right.
And I was like getting, Commando has a lot of the same pedigree because I believe it's produced by one of the same producers like Lawrence Gordon, and the score is basically dead on the same. David Patrick Kelly is in it as well. It's just like, so I'm kind of like, while I'm watching this movie, I'm getting like flashbacks to a lot of different other 80s action movies because if you kind of look at the personnel involved in this show, from like the producers to who did the score to some of the actors, like Jonathan Banks shows up in Beverly Hills Cop,
Oh, that's right.
You know what I mean? Like, and
which is by Martin Brest, who did Midnight Run.
Well, and like it's like David Patrick Kelly and Sonny Landham, who plays like the number 2 heavy.
Oh, yeah.
He shows up in like Predator and stuff like that, which are again, these are all like, and these are all like people that have like pedigree in like basically a run of movies in the 80s where they were just kind of pulpy action, kind of like crowd pleasers and stuff like that. So all these people basically from 1982 got work for the rest of the 80s in all these other movies that are a big part of the public lexicon and stuff like that. So it's not just the buddy cop genre. It's kind of like the whole Hollywood ecosystem that kind of gets fed a little bit by some of the people that are involved in this movie. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up a little bit because like as a film fan, as you guys obviously are as well, like just picking up on like, oh, they did that. Oh, that person's in the credit. Like, it's like,
it's always like the interconnective tissue between film production, right?
I mean, that's...
What do you guys think? So Midnight Run was obviously a lesser film in the genre, both at the time period and I think over time, but it's especially lately kind of gotten a really big cult status. It's also just like 48 Hours, one of those movies that I knew existed and had saw bits and pieces on TBS of, but what's your history with it, guys?
I've never seen it before. Only like little snippets, I think probably on like USA or something, or TNT back in the long back in the day, because they don't play this on cable anymore, I don't think. It's a little bit too old for that. But yeah, this is my first time ever seeing it. So I don't know. Hendricks, I imagine you probably had seen it before.
No, but here's the, I would have thought, this would have been, because like I really like Charles Grodin just as a performer and a presence. Like, I think he's, kind of an underrated actor and, entertainer. And I would have thought that I would have hit this part of his biography earlier, but I only saw the film for the first time just last year because it was on, because it was on streaming for free. Well, not free, but it's just like, but I do like.
So what was your first reaction to it? Seeing it for the first time, what did you think?
It's actually kind of nostalgic in a way that I really enjoyed more than 48 Hours. Like it's a better film in my opinion. I think Midnight Run is a better film, and it has a lot of, and this maybe is a little bit showing my bias for the production aspect because I kind of like these days because I work in the entertainment industry. I kind of appreciate some of the things that I see on screen in different ways. Sometimes it's just like they did a lot of stunts. It's basically planes, trains, and automobiles on steroids. It's like it's a buddy cop movie that's a road trip. Like it's a fun movie. They are they just kind of like, and you wouldn't think that this is like kind of seeing a lot of movies with Robert De Niro over the years. Like I feel like this one kind of gets passed over sometimes a little bit, like in people's memories. Like Robert De Niro is really good. Like I think the first comedy movie I think I saw Robert De Niro one was what was the one with Ben Stiller? It's not Meet the Fockers, but
Meet the Parents.
Meet the Parents, right? That was the first one.
2000.
And it was kind of a big. It's like Robert De Niro is doing a comedy, and just like, well, he did like the king of comedy way back in the 80s, which I think everybody forgets. But then this movie,
I think it's called Joker by Todd Phillips.
Good
But
point. When I was watching all those scenes, I was just like, oh, someone watched
yeah.
The King of Comedy for the first time. And was just like, yeah, let me.
Yoink.
But it also stars another character actor from the genre, John Astin,
Oh yeah.
who is the
Beverly Hills Cop. Is
Beverly
he
Hills Cop, but he's also
Yeah.
so in this movie he's the other bounty hunter, the competing bounty hunter and stuff like that. So, but I was for whatever reason, what I picked up upon, they have Robert De Niro in like the rapids, like he's like clinging onto a rock in the rapids, trying to be saved by Charles Grodin's character via tree branch. You know, he's holding out the
Mhm.
branch and he's just like, promise that you'll let me go if I save you and stuff like that. And just the whole construction of the scene where Robert De Niro is just basically getting inundated by like, you know, rapidly rushing water, and Charles Grodin just basically kind of being dry and like, you know, focused on like, if I save you, you'll let you go. That kind of distilled the movie down to its essence a little bit for me, about kind of the absurdity of it all, the set pieces and everything. And I really enjoyed it. I mean, like I said, it's a better movie than 48 Hours, in my opinion.
Chris, what do you think?
I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's aged.
I disagree with both you guys.
Oh my gosh!
Oh, here we go.
You'll have your moment to talk about the genre. I did. I just had so much more fun watching this movie.
Absolutely.
I think that there's just like a sense of joy to it that just you don't see anymore, and yet it still like ages really well, because not only do you have like two of the best American actors in their prime, but like playing roles that are not against type, but definitely like play to strengths that I don't think anybody realized. Like Charles Grodin as like a mob accountant, like it's just like such a weird bit of casting, but it works 100-fold. And same thing with Robert De Niro. He gets to do like these dramatic beats that he's so well known for, like when he sees his
his
daughter for the first time in several years.
That was a good,
And yet still he like can be zany. Like you it's funny, but it's ridiculous that it took 12 years, for somebody to really use him in a central comedic role again, because like the boxcar scene when he shows back up, like he's just I don't know. And there's obviously the relationship piece, which I think is the thing we keep coming back to, and one of the reasons that 48 Hours can be salvaged, and one of the reasons that Lethal Weapon still works despite the baggage of Mel Gibson in 2022, where you have like just this click where and especially because like they don't force it and they let it grow, and that odd couple aspect feels like it's something that can't be overcome because Robert De Niro wants his money so bad, and Charles Grodin is just not he can move around money and be very analytical, but he can't overpower him. So like, I just think that it's impressive still today. I was actually kind of shocked that the way I ended up watching it was through Criterion Channel because I'm like, wait, this is a Criterion movie.
Same here. Yeah.
But it was part of their Yaphet Kotto collection.
Who's great in the movie.
Right.
Oh, it's awesome. His death stares when he takes off his sunglasses, or when he's stealing the cigarettes from the other bounty hunter. Like I mean, the movie. I really have to say the movie really was as well for me, still clicking. And it's a movie in 1988. This movie, so it was kind of at the tail end of kind of the buddy cop. It came out after this 48 Hours movie, after Lethal Weapon, after a lot of other kind of predecessors had kind of riffed on the formula, and yet the formula still endures with this movie.
And that's what I think is like 48 Hours, because it was messy, like it started it, but they didn't figure it out yet. Midnight Run is where they figured it out. And I would even go so far, except for like one little plot thing that annoys me, the discs at the end. Aside from that, like I think otherwise I would venture to say, except for that, a perfect film.
It's pretty good. I think they could have cut I think they could have cut like 20 minutes out of it, because it did feel a little long towards the end, but they did
Yeah,
need
it's much
that.
longer. I mean, it's over 2 hours long.
Yeah, I think that
Right.
they needed some of that for the set pieces that they did again, which involves
It's a big movie. Yeah.
flying a triplane, flying.
That's so stupid. This movie is so dumb.
Oh,
There's so many scenes like the helicopter scene, the plane
I
scene,
I
is this
love.
Blues Brothers 3? Like with
Yes,
the car
And all
chase
of,
in the desert?
oh, but that's all great. Oh, I mean, the reveal that Charles Grodin's character actually wasn't afraid of flying and he was a trained
right.
pilot. Oh, that still
Yes,
hits.
yeah.
Man, like I mean, I think I don't know. I can appreciate someone having obviously issues with any film, but at the same time, just watching this as a pure viewer, kind of on top of 48 Hours, which we were just talking about, and kind of going to Chris's point as an evolution in the genre. I do really feel like it was really firing on all cylinders in terms of showing what the genre was capable of, kind of expanding the world and kind of opening things up.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense.
Tear it down, Wiper.
No, I don't want to tear it down. It's just when I look at like 48 Hours, and there's such good films to pair with each other because there's so much overlap, but the tone is so different. Like in 48 Hours, I feel like I'm getting this gritty sort of a lot of social commentary in that script. Tons. It's just filled with it. The language, the slang, everything that they're talking. Like, there's so much, I think, from just, especially looking back on the 80s and the early 80s, it's like, oh, you can kind of get transported a little bit back to that era. It's just infused with that time. Midnight Run, to me, this is crazy that I'm arguing this because I'm usually on the exact opposite argument.
I was gonna say,
seems like a very pared down, potent, extremely tight action pieces here, right? And they talk about the mechanics of a film and it clicking. That's all true here with Midnight Run, without a doubt. But to me, it's like the social and character stuff just doesn't work as well for some reason.
Are you accusing it of being maybe Pollyannish?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a little bit,
because it's definitely not
about, like,
it's not gritty like 48 Hours, of course.
No, not at all. It's very zany. Like, I think of all the action sequences, and I'm like, oh, this is comedic action. This is slapstick action.
Well, one
shoots a helicopter with this, like, what? I mean, but on the one hand, it's fun, but then on the other hand, it's like, I guess I don't know how to process it in the same way. Like 48 Hours, none of that action was really comedic, right?
No,
like,
it's horribly violent. Like all these 44 magnums going off and these big blood squibs going off in people's chest. Yeah, which look really fake,
by the way.
which look really fake, by the way. All these like blood squibs, they didn't do a good job there. But so like, if you look up like buddy cop film movie on the internet, they'll say it often infuses like comedy with like quote action and thriller elements. And so there's definitely a wide spectrum of things you can have in your movie. Beverly Hills Beverly Hills Cop. I was gonna say 48 Hours basically is an action movie. I mean, it has comedic elements, but it's mostly a hard-boiled, like, let's get those bad guys. Versus Midnight Run, comedy.
Yeah,
definitely comedy. Well, with lots of action, but like, it's very different tones and styles.
Absolutely.
I mean, we talked about this a bit with 21 Jump Street. Right, where it's like that is a comedy film, but it's using a lot of action set pieces as a vehicle for that comedy, right? And ultimately, you're if you want something darker, like In Bruges is very does that balance thing. You talked about how The Nice Guys, also Shane Black from Lethal Weapon.
Yes, I was going to mention that.
Right, so it's like, I mean, it depends on what kind of balance you're looking for. And you're right. No social comment.
Thing.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say,
the thing. The thing that throws me off is that, okay, like in this, what does this remind me of a little bit? It's okay, yeah, it's planes, trains, and automobiles, but with like a weird dark underbelly, criminal underbelly noir aspect to it, right? That's where I think the juxtaposition, it doesn't mix well. It's like you got like bounty hunters and people killing each other, and then they're like getting chased by a helicopter with a machine gun shooting them. It just is sort of like, it's either you have to go full on like comedy over the top absurdity, which this like plays with, or you have to do this hard boiled thing and then you add sort of comedic elements to it. To me, it's kind of in a weird no man's land, but it doesn't. I'm obviously in the minority with this because it's sort of.
I think that Midnight Run committed to the vibe right off from the bat. You have this. So in Midnight Run, the beginning scene is Robert De Niro picking a lock to a door, trying to hunt a bounty, and he basically drops his stuff on the ground, and then a big shotgun blast comes in over his head. Like it's like he almost cheated death, but it's kind of played like, obviously nonchalantly. It's just like, well, he escaped that, and he's going to get his man either way. But like, I feel like Midnight Run committed from the get go to kind of the zany aspect that you're talking
Well, 100%.
about.
It's 100% zany, but like, I guess like when I compare, like you mentioned The Nice Guys, that's also has that zaniness to it.
Oh, it's a terrible movie.
Unbelievable. But it's like, I don't know. It's like, I don't know. I just can't go with, okay, where it works is Blues Brothers. That's where it works. That's like the perfect, not perfect, very, very good, zany, comedy, action-y type film. And also kind of a musical at the same time. Masterpiece, apparently. But
is that a future episode, perhaps?
Yeah, we'll see. But I think, to me, it's like that's where that style. Okay, back to, I think it was the first episode of this cycle, Chris, the Coen brothers, like Raising Arizona, zany as hell, works incredibly well. Here, it's like, to me, it's like a weird. They're trying to be grounded with the characters and the plot, but then also doing this really zany thing. To me, it doesn't work. That's as simple as that. And I don't think it's ever going to work for me.
Here's my final argument on why I think that tone balance does work. And I think when we, trace back the origins of this genre throughout like the earlier years, like what really works for me is that combination of the 80s like violent aspect and like it's profane, but then you have a real sense, like I said this at the top, that sense of joy feels very much just like an old school Hollywood blockbuster, even like not just like talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark, like adventure style, but also dating all the way back to like a 40s or 50s Howard Hawks movie, where it just like what matters the most is the characters, but every single scene both helps us better connect with these characters as well as like create a spectacle for us. And so I think that like whereas 48 Hours, like I said, it feels like it has like one or two scenes, particularly the classic Eddie Murphy scene going into the Hick bar. Midnight Run just feels like hit after hit, like we talked about all the different like vehicle oriented scenes, but even those small scenes of like on the diner car and the train, where they're talking to each other, and we keep coming back to this, the two characters talking to each other when they're in the box car. There's this great story about how Robert De Niro was famously like unable in some shooting days to like find that balance of comedy and drama, and so like Grodin would be like literally the guy to vamp or improv on the scene because he's more of a classical comedy guy to get De Niro in that mode. And so like the weird like non sequitur about having sex with chickens, it is like literally it's actually Grodin like trying to get De Niro to lighten up, and so it feels so natural that the absurdity and heightenedness of all the action is just like, I don't know, it feels like bells and whistles on top of an already like really solid character piece. And ultimately that's why it does work for me, whereas it doesn't because there's just not enough of it, and it's not fleshed out enough. It's not as clockwork in 48 Hours.
Drax, we're going to give you the last word on Midnight Run and 48 Hours. Take it away. What do you got for us? What's your final sort of thought?
It's a little intimidating, but
I like to intimidate.
What I'll say is, just kind of going down memory lane of the genre we keep kind of talking about, the buddy cop genre, and kind of seeing the genesis of it with 48 Hours, and then kind of seeing it almost a decade later, kind of played with to some extent with Midnight Run. I don't want to say full extent because I'm not a prophet. I don't know if I don't know if there's other things that can be mined from it, but the dichotomy between the two was very striking, but at the same time, you just kind of can see the enduring appeal of a lot of the beats that are being hit in both films, and then kind of the ways that people play with it throughout the years. And so, I'll just kind of say again, I think, if anybody is, wondering, what our recommends on this day, Midnight Run is the better movie. It's the more fun movie, and it's the one that I would watch on cable if I'm, flipping past it. But I think it'll be interesting when you guys kind of delve deeper into kind of what kind of happens subsequent to this, in the 90s or 2000s or whatever. The chemistry basically trumps all, the interaction between the two leads in both movies is fantastic. And that's something obviously that's never going to go away. And so that's kind of what I'll just leave it.
Yeah, I think it's ironically the non-action scenes in both movies that make them exciting and engaging films. Okay, what's going up, Chris? What do you got coming up?
Man, we're going to dive into the 70s next week. That is kind of where the line between action comedy and, caper with jokes starts to get kind of fuzzy, but I'm excited because I've never seen Thunderbolt and Lightfoot with Clint Eastwood. But I am also excited to talk about The Hot Rock, which is a great Redford movie that doesn't really get talked about a lot anymore. So check back with us next episode for a look at the 70s Absurdist Action. This has been Film Trace.